Hey, folks, just a friendly reminder that all shows on the Madness Comic Network are produced by their individual hosts and in no way reflect the opinions of the network as a whole. The statements in the following broadcast are not necessarily the opinions of the Madness Comic Network, its staff, sponsors, or contributors. This show is rated TVMA, as are all of them and all those other letters. Viewer discretion is highly advised. And, just do what Doc says. Read that again. Peace, everybody.
Electric bolts from a stormy sky, leather wings of a dragon's flight, a psychic sword cuts through the night, a fiery heart standing ready to fight. Southern nights they rise and soar, God in the south, yeah, they're ready to roar. From the shadows to the shining lights, that they'll protect you day and night. Southern nights. In a world where terrors creep, monsters need their beauty sleep. Dr. Black with steady hand heals the beasts across the land. Vampires and creatures of the night find their savior in Black's light. No more horror guaranteed, thanks to Monster MD. There's a shop on the corner with a sign that glows. Step inside if you dare, where the oddness flows. Ancient whispers echo through the dusty air. Shelves of fallen deities, all beyond repair. Gods and services, musical merchandise. Gods and services, wanna roll the dice. Zeus is in the bargain bin, thunder on the cheap. Hades sells for half off while his minions creep. Aphrodite's beauty faded over time. Now she runs the counter in this celestial five and dime. Gods and services, mystical merchandise. Gods and services, wanna roll the dice. Gods and services, wanna roll the dice. Zeus is in the bargain bin, thunder on the cheap. Hades sells for half off while his minions creep. Aphrodite's beauty faded over time. Now she runs the counter in this celestial five and dime. Gods and services, mystical merchandise. Gods and services, wanna roll the dice. Gods and services, wanna roll the dice.
Get the latest fantasy horror anthology, Gods and Services New Location, from Critical Blast Publishing.
Little president in his sandbox play, build a tower, make it stay. Digging deep through the golden sand, building the future with your hands. Tiny suits and shiny shoes, making plans and making news. friends all gather to join along. In the sandbox they all belong. Little presidents from that play, every day a brand new day, learning, growing your own way, in the great big sandbox that is the USA. The USA. Share your dreams with everyone, sandbox fun under the sun. Big ideas taking flight, with Little Trump everything's bright. Dig a moat, build a wall, in the sandbox he stands so tall. Dreamer dream, builder build, Little Trump your heart's fulfilled. Little President Trump that play, every day a brand new day, learning, growing your own way, in the great big sandbox that is the USA. Hooray, hooray, for the USA.
Clearing streams in stables cold and gray, shadows dance while horses softly neigh. He tells the creatures in the barn each night that one day he'll wear armor shining bright. From dawn to dusk he works with honest hand, feeding mares and working on the land. But he has his heart set on the table round, to join the knights who bravely serve the crown. With a sword and shield he'll join the fight, prove his worth before it's Christmas night. He'll show them all as he sets out on his quest, a gift to himself, a night before Christmas. With a sword and shield he'll join the fight, prove his worth before it's Christmas night. He'll show them all as he sets out on his quest, a gift to himself, a night before Christmas. But chivalry demands self-sacrifice, and when folks need help, this boy does not think twice. He meets the need, though it cost him his dream. But maybe, maybe, maybe things are more than they seem. With a sword and shield he'll join the fight, prove his worth before it's Christmas night. He'll show them all as he sets out on his quest, a gift to himself, a night before Christmas. In the dark they write their tales, spinning webs with ghostly trails. Words so chilly they prevail, in the night their echoes wail. In comes the masked, mic in hand, horror writers take the stand. Questions deep like shifting sand, in the spotlight understand. Books of terror, stories flow, pages turn and shadows grow. Horrors you don't want to know. Welcome to the damn show. Gothic Scrivener, what's your name? Tell us of your twisted game, how you fill the hearts with shame, set the horror world aflame. Scripted nightmare, deadly scene, heaven, hell, no in between. What's the villain's devious scheme?
That's right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Damn Show on the Critical Blast podcast. I'm your host, Damascus Mintzmeyer. Our regular host, RJ Carter, is dealing with a zombie apocalypse on an alternate Earth. But don't worry, he'll be back tomorrow night. In the meantime, I'll be interviewing author Jim Horlock, whose short story collection Change and Other Terrors was recently released by Quill and Crow Publishing. Good evening, Jim.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. It's nice to have you as a guest tonight. I always like to start my shows with this question. Who are you, what do you do, and why do you do it?
Well, I'm a writer from Wales, and why do I write? I, as a child, was afraid of absolutely everything. Huge, scared of the dark, scared of everything, and I think somewhere along the line, I just became fascinated with fear and how to get past it. And that led to me consuming a lot of horror content and subsequently writing horror. And now that's what I do. That's what I mostly do. I dabble in other writing, but mostly horror.
My favorite too. Is this your first book?
Yes, yeah, it is, yeah.
Oh, wow. Unlike a lot of collections, usually a lot of collections will be some that you don't like, but there really was not a bad one in the bunch. One thing I particularly enjoyed was that each story seems to be like a self-contained world unto itself. Like you could say some of them are almost set in alternate realities. What made you like? I'm fascinated by how you do that. You don't just create like the characters; you create like a whole world in each story.
I think you kind of have to if you want it to be, if you want it to hit and be believable to a reader. I think it can't just be just some fragment. There has to be a grounding in there that makes it feel more complete than that. A lot of the stories for me, they start often with a nightmare. I'll have a nightmare, something that really freaks me out. And when I wake up, I'm like, okay, but this element of the nightmare was really interesting. And so maybe I can build something around that, and it spreads out from there and becomes hopefully something complete that people can enjoy. Do people enjoy it? I hope people enjoy it.
I think people do enjoy it. People obviously enjoy horror. They enjoy. There was someone once that I saw on social media said that there were three kinds of people who enjoyed horror. That there were people that they used it as catharsis for their trauma. There were people that used it to expel like their fear, like you were saying. You know, they like channeled their fear into it. And the third one were the thrill seekers. That people that just like the rush of it.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I probably fall into the third category. I love that. I love the rush of it.
You're in it for the adrenaline.
Yes, exactly.
I think for me, I think it's mostly catharsis for me. I think that horror creates a kind of, as strange as it sounds, I feel like it creates a safe space to deal with scary things. And a lot of the things we write about as horror writers are just emblematic of real life scary things. But when you're reading the book, they can't actually hurt you. So it's kind of a way of working through it without actually being in danger.
Yeah, that's true. And you can also use it as one thing I love about horror is you can use it as metaphors for other things.
Oh, sure.
I like that.
I mean, almost all horror is. It's pretty rare, especially if horror is going to be something that really gets you. I think if you peel back the face, there'll be something under there deeper that is a metaphor for a societal fear or a personal fear of your own that's somewhere down there that you maybe haven't confronted yet. I think that those are the most effective horrors.
In your book's introduction, you say horror is change. And you're kind of right in a way. The passage of time and growing older can be some of like the scariest things to bear witness to.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. That's,
it was a big thing for David Cronenberg, The Fly. He famously said that was about, I believe he referred to it as like the disease of age, where it's something you can't escape. There's nothing you can do. And I think that inevitability is where the fear comes from, right? I'm powerless against this thing. It's kind of a cosmic horror in its own. And that's what the collection was aiming at. Because I'm terrified of change. I'm very change averse.
Yeah, I like that. I like that you mentioned that in your introduction also, that you're very change averse. I am to a certain extent too. Like I'm one of those curmudgeon people. I like everything in the same place, and I'm always that kind of way because when I was a kid, when I was growing up, I hated it. Like if my favorite TV show changed the time slot, I hated if they added a new character. I was that kind of kid.
Well, it can be a sign as well of. I'm not saying this is the case for you or indeed for anyone, but it can be a sign of dealing with trauma as well, which obviously
Mm.
is another thing that horror can help with. Is that
Yeah,
if
true,
you
true.
like things to be very regimented, it's a sign that you had perhaps a trauma or a lot of chaos in your younger formative years.
Yeah, that actually was true. There was quite a bit of that for me when I was in my younger years. So
You see,
Quill and
you were
Crow.
seeking that
hmm
regimentation.
hmm Quill and Crow is an up and coming publishing house with a firm foothold in Gothic literature. What was it about them specifically that made you gravitate towards them as publishers for this book?
Well, do you know, I had a short story accepted for their online magazine previously.
hmm
The story was called Clepsydra, and it was about a man dealing with some quite severe kind of body dysmorphia, and it lent fully into the weird horror angle that could go down. And I was actually kind of surprised when they took it because like, they're renowned for their gothic stuff, and this was more weird horror. But as it turned out, they were kind of looking to branch out a little bit, and they're firmly established in the gothic, and they were looking to kind of do some collections. And I really enjoyed working with them, the editing process for that short story for their magazine. So I thought, well, I'll shoot my shot. You don't ask, you don't get. And I was thrilled. I really was. They were really good to work with, really easy to communicate with, which in indie publishing is like gold dust. It's really good to get a publisher who's available to answer your queries and to put your fears at ease. Yeah,
Yeah,
really good.
I've we had a whole bunch of them on during the summer, a big group show for one of their poetry books, and it was a really great group of people.
Oh, they're a really good crowd. I mean, poetry. I can't do poetry. It's not a skill that I have. But they
Me
like the
neither.
stuff there is fantastic.
Yeah. So let's go down the line and talk about each one of your stories. There was 13, lucky 13 in the book.
Entirely accidental, in a way. I didn't aim for that. It's kind
of. I loved it though. Give us a small recap and tell us where you drew it. Tell us what each one's about and where you got the inspiration from. So the first one was called Limb. The introductory story was called Limbs.
So this was the only one that had been previously published. It was actually the first horror story that I ever got an acceptance for, way back in 2017. And by the now sadly defunct Gehenna and Hinnom Press, they were a small horror indie publisher. They were really cool. Really sad to see them close their doors. But the inspiration for that one was, again, it was a nightmare. I had this nightmare. I can't go into too much detail about what scene it is because it's a spoiler. But yeah, one of the scenes in that was straightly a nightmare, and I built a story around it. And that's something that happens quite often. Sometimes it's the last scene, sometimes it's the first scene, sometimes, in this case, it was somewhere in the middle. But yeah, that's straightly from a nightmare.
Yeah, that one, the graphic, like the body horror imagery, because that one, the plot was, I think I can give like the setup was there was a mysterious gas that had like passed over the country, and people who were exposed to it, their bodies would rearrange themselves in horrifying ways, and that the imagery, just the detail he went into, that was some scary shit, man. that was a really good introductory story too. There was some.
Well, interestingly, it wasn't originally the first story. My editor suggested putting it first and moving it up the order.
Very good suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is why we need editors.
That was a very good suggestion because it was just, I mean, that was very, very intense. I remember when I first read that, I was like, this is going to be a really interesting book. So the second story is called Dispersion. Tell us about that.
So With this one, this didn't. This was kind of almost a thought experiment. It didn't come from a nightmare or anything like that. I wanted to write something where the traditional senses were not available to the protagonist. They might start out your sight, your touch, your sense of smell, all super important in forming a narrative. And I wanted to kind of take them away and see if I could write something with almost alien senses. And also, I'm super into fungus. So combine those two things, and I was like, okay, well, what would sensory perception be like as a fungus or for a fungus, and how can I turn this into a story?
What is it about fungus that's appealing?
That's a really good question. I just think they're so weird. They're just so weird.
That explains the later story with the mushrooms, though. That explains that one. We'll get to that in a second, but
I'm trying to wean myself off writing about fungus, because otherwise I'll do it too much. I'll be the fungus guy.
Oh, okay. The third story was called Into the Walls, and this one was one of my personal favorites. This one had a really, really stark, creepy atmosphere to it. Tell us what the plot is of this one, and then tell us where you got the idea from.
So this one features a young child as the protagonist, and she has been moved from the home that she knew her whole life so far into a new apartment block. And I wanted to have a young protagonist somewhere in the collection, because I think there's a lot scary when you're a child, and especially around change. And for me, I experienced something similar. It wasn't an apartment block for me, but I moved a great distance away from everything I'd known. And it was terrifying. It was it was a big upheaval, lost all my friends, felt very alone, didn't have those home comforts. And I think there's something quite powerful if you can capture that from a child's point of view. You can really tap into some fears that I think many of us have experienced. So yeah, that was what I was kind of driving for with that one. Without giving too much away, then things start to happen in the apartment block, and it's a question maybe at the start, are these just fears made manifest, nightmares, or is there something actually sinister afoot?
Yeah, you're right though. When you're a kid, and like if you move or there's great changes, something like that, there's that sense of powerlessness too, because like if an adult moves, if you move somewhere as an adult, you're like, hey, you make the choice to do that. But as a kid, there's no choice. You're just, okay, we're doing it, and you just kind of have to go along with it. And that's a very, very scary thing.
Yeah, you might not even be told until it's happening. You're like, okay, we're going to pack up and move in 2 weeks. And,
right.
It's literally world shattering. Your whole world is that one place, because you're so young, you don't have any other experiences, and then all gone. Scary stuff.
I think another thing scary that I think people forget as they grow up, they forget about that. And they also forget that as to a child, often the scariest thing are adults. Adults are scary when you're a kid, because everything's so unfamiliar. And
they've got so much power over you. Even adults that are not your parents are kind of in charge of you, no matter where they are, no matter where you encounter them. That's you again, powerlessness.
Absolutely. But that one really had a impact on me. I love that the atmosphere that you imbued, and that the mood of it just was very, very stark and isolating, which is what you were going for, and you succeeded very well.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it landed.
So the fourth story was called Exit Program, Yes, No. I really like this one. This is an office story.
Yeah, so I've worked in a lot of offices, and so I kind of cheekily wanted to get my own back at the office environment to some extent. And there's, I'll find horror anywhere. But I think there is a certain amount of horror in the cubicle lifestyle, the drudging of it. It's so easy to every day the same. You lose track of the days. And I wanted to kind of dial that up to 11 and make it cosmic or weird, and literally have someone kind of losing track of that time and starting to experience weird stuff, loops. And I love it. Another thing that I'm a sucker for, other than fungus, is a decaying loop. I love writing a loop and then writing it again, but changing it, and then doing that and doing that and doing that. And again, I have to stop because it's all I'll do otherwise. Wean myself off it. But yeah, exit program, kind of a knock at the capitalist hellscape that is the office lifestyle. Something very real for so many of us. I think, funnily enough, one of my friends read that and they got a genuine catharsis out of it. They said that they almost found it funny because it was like ripping on office life a little bit, which I loved. Yeah, it's good to hear.
Yeah, I noticed the you were talking about cosmic. I noticed the like subtle Lovecraftian influence there. I could just see the hint of it. And that was all I like that.
I think you've got to. I think there are so many. If you're out there looking at short stories, there are so many that cite a Lovecraftian influence, whatever that means for them. I just couldn't resist putting a little nudge, a little hint in there.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned like you use like I've noticed several of the stories had a repeated motif of time and time loops, and I love my favorite type of science fiction is like time travel or alternate reality science fiction. That's like my favorite. I'll read anything with that, and I've often wish I could write like a horror story that's a time travel story, like put those two together. And you do that really well by having like the time loops and have it be horror and stuff in your work. I really like that.
I mean, there've been a few influences about that. There's a great movie called Coherence. It's not really time, but it's kind of alternate reality. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have not. No. Sounds neat though.
It's you'd love it with your passion for sci-fi and that kind of alternate reality stuff. But that was kind of an influence on this and on some of the other stories as well.
Wow.
Yeah, I recommend seeking that out.
I'm gonna have to find that one. Okay, so the fifth story, I love this one too. The ending to this one totally blew me away. It's called Burning Day, and this is one of your stories that is like built in its own. You like build up an entire like world just for this story. And tell us about that one.
So that one started off almost more in a fantasy setting than it ended up being. Early drafts of that one were very heavily fantasy, and it just became more contemporary as it went along, as it got redrafted. And I think I like it better that way. I think it's especially to fit into this collection. But again, quite a young protagonist. Again, feelings of isolation. And having to be kind of self-sufficient when no adult is going to help you. But I really, like you said, the ending, I really wanted to just pull the rug out at the end there.
That one, that was really, that was, I was like, okay. Because I was like, but it's so cool though. It's so cool.
I like to do what I call a big left turn. Sometimes in the middle, sometimes at the end, but that was probably one of the first times I'd done that technique of but actually this story wasn't about this at all. It was actually about this all along.
And but what's so funny is once you see it, once you know the ending is, you're all like, I can see it. I can see it through the whole movie. Yeah, makes sense. The sixth story, I love this one too. This is another one of my favorites, and this one also had something to do with like time loops. It was called Imposter. And this one was about the passengers on an airplane. I don't even know how to describe it, but like it makes sense when you're reading it. Their personalities swap bodies, and then it starts over from the beginning, works through, then they stop, go to another body, and then everything starts over. And it's almost like everybody on the plane switches bodies at some point, and it all resets to the beginning again. So how did you come up with that idea? That one was fascinating to me.
That I know you're not supposed to pick favorites, but that one might be my secret favorite in the collection because I just let myself go for it and make it as weird as I wanted. And I'm so glad to hear that it landing with people because I thought that would be the one that people wouldn't like. But it's done quite well, and I'm really pleased. again, I wanted to play with a loop and break a narrative. So I'll write a scene and then basically write the same scene again, but just change stuff and just expect you, the reader, to deal with it and just see how far I could push that and what I could change and get away with, but still have kind of a coherent story at the end.
I like this
Yeah.
stream of consciousness feel to it. Like it just, like I can tell you just like sat down and just like we're opening up the brain and just letting it all just flow out.
God, you know that it was so complicated working out who was who about halfway through that story. I was like, right now, who was who at the start again? Who's gone where? I made a
And to complicate matters, some people were dying also.
Yeah.
So it was just like not only are they swapping bodies, time is starting over. Oh yes, some of them are dying and killing each other, and then they start over again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and you don't know like how or why or how long this is going to go on. But I guess apparently forever.
I mean, I know, but I'm just never going to tell anyone. Well, maybe one day I'll tell. Maybe one day I'll explain why it's happening.
Maybe that'd be good for a sequel story, maybe, or a prequel.
Maybe.
So the seventh story, this one goes back to your fungus interest. This is the seed. I think this was the longest story in the book, if I remember correctly. And this one, 4 friends, they're on a like weekend hiking excursion. One of them gets injured. They stumble upon a community, this like backwoods, like cult community. They live out in like a commune, and they're very excited because they get to grow these strange mushrooms. So tell us about that one. Where did you come up with that?
This is another one where the very first thing was a nightmare that I had, a scene, which is the scene one of the characters is on a bed and another one is observing them through the window while some stuff happens, some awful stuff. And that was the nightmare that I had. I woke up from that and I was like, okay, there's got to be a story in this. And I like the dynamic of having a group of characters that are all just a little bit different and having them play off each other. Dialogue is one of the most fun things to write. So I wanted something where I could put that together and take these guys on a journey, a horrible journey. Another thing in my long list of things that scares me is cults, that kind of fanaticism. Oh, yeah. Terrifying how people can become so brainwashed and believe things so fervently that they'll give up basically everything for it. And so I wanted to kind of play with all those elements and put it together. I kind of like stories, Lost in the Woods kind of stories as well, bit of folk horror. The Ritual by Adam Neville, I really enjoyed, and it's got kind of similar kind of themes to some of that, at least the movie version, less so the book version. But yeah, so it's a kind of an amalgamation of all those bits.
Yeah, cults scare the hell out of me too. I remember when I was a teenager, the Heaven's Gate cult was like all over the news, and that one freaked me out. Like I was like, I can't remember, 15, 16, 15. I think it was 15, something like that. And that was just weird. I don't think I'd really been exposed to anything quite like that before that time. But that was Marshall Applewhite. That was just a really, really weird, creepy, freaky thing to see those videos and stuff on TV about the matching outfits and the bodies all laid out and everything like that. That was very, very impactful to me.
Yeah, disturbing stuff for sure.
And of course, after that, because it disturbed me, of course, I read everything about cults that I could find.
That's it. That's what happened.
Absolutely. So I'm well versed in like cult lore, but oh man, that stuff freaks me out. Because as you say, it's like the mindlessness of it. Like they just turn themselves over, and then all of a sudden, there's an army of robots. You know, I mean, that's what they're kind of like. It's dangerous.
I think when you get right down to it, that's what it is. It's they're willing to give up even their own personality, the thing that makes them who they are, is gone, and they're now something else. And it's kind of
But
that's a terrifying prospect.
I really like the dynamic of the four friends in that story because they've known each other for a long time. They have like the sense of camaraderie. Like you identify with them because they're the familiar, and you can kind of pick out because each one of them you can kind of pick out and you're like, well, I know someone like that. My friend was like my friend's like that. I know a dude like that. I know that guy. You know, and the cult people are very very creepy. But and as you were saying, I think the scene that freaked me out the most is probably the one from your nightmare where they're on the bed and their sweat is feeding the mushrooms underneath the bed, and that like totally freaked me out. I was like, oh my god. But very well executed that one was.
Thank you very much.
And okay, the next one is Lullaby. This one had a good twist to it too. Tell us where this one came from.
So this one, I was actually lying awake. I used to suffer quite badly with insomnia, and I was lying awake one night, as I often did, and I just staring at the ceiling, and I became irritated by this beam of light through the curtains. So I got up to try and adjust them, and as I did that, I looked out, and there was an empty stroller under the lamppost outside my house, and I was like, I don't think that was there earlier. And also, how has this happened? Like, you need the stroller for the baby. You wouldn't just leave, like, and then I started thinking about that and the weirdness of it all. And I was like, well, there's got to be something here. There's got to be some, like, that immediately takes me to like bleak, sad places when you see something like that. So I wanted to kind of work on that and you know, other kinds of sudden change that you might not be able to control, or the loss of a loved one, especially the loss of a child. Horrific for all manner of reasons. And so I kind of wanted to delve into that a little bit and crack that open. That one, I probably shouldn't say this, but if I had to pick one that fits least with the collection, I think it's maybe Lullaby, because there's nothing overly weird or cosmic about it. There's no cults, there's no real monsters. It's just sad.
You said sad psychological horror. That would fit into that category, I think.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's correct.
And that one's followed by Changes. That's I guess you could say that's like a title story. I guess you might be able to say in one respect. Oh wait, no, wait. I think that is right. Yeah, Changes is next. This was insinuated to be like a werewolf story. I picked up on that, even though I don't think the word werewolf is actually used anywhere in the story. But tell us about this one.
So this one, I'm afraid it's kind of a boring answer. This one is literally shot for shot a nightmare. The entire thing. I dreamed this from start to finish and woke up at the end. And I was like, I've got to write that down. Like when my heart stops pounding out of my chest, like, I've got to write that down. There was something about it that was so visceral and terrifying while I was dreaming it. Even though to read, I don't think it's the scariest one in the collection, but like to experience, it was so intense. And I was like, okay, well, this is basically a complete arc. This is like there's a complete narrative arc here. So let's write it down and kind of work out a little bit what it's about. But I changed very little. I think there's elements of various. It's definitely a werewolf story for sure. I love werewolves. Like,
no, me too.
Yeah, favorite horror monster for sure. But interestingly, a lot of the horror doesn't come from the werewolf part. I think there's maybe an element of cultishness in this one as well, with some sort of kind of brainwashing-ish behavior going on. But yeah, no, I think there's an element of physical change, like perhaps puberty, as a driver for horror in this too. This young man is going through a change in his body that he's not going to be able to control, and it makes people treat him differently. And it will mean a huge change for the rest of his life. So I think there's an element of that in there. Yeah.
One thing that's interesting about dreams and nightmares, if you like think about it, because your mind, like you're creating them in your mind. Like even when you're asleep, you're still creating, you're still thinking and still making, and you're creating those images. That I've always found that kind of fascinating, like where that comes from and inside of people.
And I wonder how much of that is what we're tapping into because it must come from a sort of similar place, even when we're consciously creating. Like when you're writing a story, sometimes the story just seems to kind of take over and write itself a little bit. And I wonder if that comes from that same sort of place.
You're probably right. The next one is Parasite. This one I thought was going to be like psychological horror because it started off seeming that way. So let's talk about that one. Where you get the idea. Tell us about the plot first, and then where you got the idea from.
So Parasite is about a man who it's the driving moment, the kind of spark that ignites the story is when he catches his reflection in the mirror blink at a different time to him. And it sets him off on this kind of psychological avalanche of other events that he starts to fear himself or something is wrong with him. And he turns to his friends and they give him some advice, and that doesn't really help. It only makes things worse. And yeah, things really spiral from there. It definitely pretends to be psychological horror to start with. I really like an ambiguous story where all the way to the end you don't know if it's purely psychological or if there's something supernatural going on. This one doesn't quite do that, but I'd love to write one that does. I really like stories that do. So I kind of wanted to hold on to that for as long as possible, and then reveal the card at the end. It was a blast to write. I would argue it's a happy ending.
In a way, it is. Yeah, it is. It's like a return home kind of ending, if you
yes,
want
absolutely
to think of it in a way.
Yeah. It's probably, there's not many of those. I don't write many of those. I tend to write bleak endings. I know there's a lot of discourse in the horror community about whether that is actually horror if you have a happy ending. I think you can do what you want. I think there are horrors that do that very well. It's just not for me.
There's a lot of good stories that have happy endings, but there's a lot of ones that have bleak endings too.
Yeah, this is about the closest I get to a happy ending.
The next story, I'm fascinated by Viking and culture and Nordic culture. And Draugr, the next story, I loved it because that's a very unique take on like vampire mythology, in one respect, vampire zombie mythology. So first tell our audience, in case they don't know, what a Draugr is, and then describe your story.
So a Draugr is a creature from Norse folklore. Many of you may know them from Skyrim, but in the folklore, they are nothing like they are in Skyrim. They're basically just glorified zombies. In the folklore, they were terrifying. They could control the weather. They could enter your nightmares. They could enlarge themselves to giant size. They could swim through rock and just appear out of the ground. They could shape shift. They had a whole host of powers, many of which, as you pointed out, are kind of similar to kind of vampire-y legends as well. And they often were obsessed with wealth. They hoarded, gold. They coveted wealth. And in a lot of the legends, there was just no way to kill them. You just couldn't get rid of them. And that was fascinating to me when I love folk horror stuff and I love folklore. And so when I read about that, I was like, I love that. That's a proper folk horror monster, one you can't even kill. You just have to either give it something or just get the hell out of there because there's no stopping this thing once it gets started. And don't get me wrong, there are legends where a good man with strong steel can kill one another. But I prefer the ones where they don't. And so in this story, a village, again, quite a young protagonist, his village is plagued by what certainly seems to be a Draugr. And everyone kind of falls apart as they realize how serious their situation is, and they try and cope with it in different ways. Some try to run, some try to like devise a way to defeat the creature, etc., etc. And again, this one is less about adults being ignorant and not realizing that there's a danger, and more about adults being powerless, which is scary when you're a child, because your adults are supposed to solve all your problems. They're supposed to fix everything.
True.
They're supposed to keep you safe. But in this instance, they can't even protect their own children. The protagonist becomes very aware of that very quickly. Yeah, it was a really fun one to write. Again, nice to play in kind of a slightly different setting.
Yeah, that was a really, really dark story too, also. But you're right about like kids, and like when you're a kid, adults around you, because as we've said, they're the ones in charge. When you're a kid, you think that adults they know what they're doing, you know. You don't realize until later when you become an adult that's like, you know, they're just winging it. You know, they're like everybody else. They're just making it up as they go. But as a kid, and like you said, that's really scary when you see as a kid that they are at a loss for something, don't know what to do, don't know what right decision to make. That's scary, because that it leads to like an insecurity in the kid, because you know, to a kid, the adults are like God almost, because they're the ones in control.
Absolutely. It's kind of world shattering the first time that happens to you, I think. There's probably a point in everyone's life where they can look back and one of their parents, they realize they couldn't help, or they couldn't solve the problem, or they saw them distraught. And it's kind of like a huge event for you. When it is,
definitely. Because you're all like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So the final two stories, I think, were probably my two favorites of the whole book, because you do it again successfully, where you create, each one is like a world building scenario, and the unseen, the situation and the world that you create there is astounding. I love that one. It's a near future where people are assigned children as like their little, almost like guardians, to keep these invisible carnivorous creatures that are out there in the air at bay. And once the kids reach like puberty, I'm assuming, they no longer have the ability to protect someone. And there's like this black market where people are selling like kids as protectors and stuff. And just, how did you come up with this? This one astounded me.
I think I just had this thought about, there's a lot in kind of supernatural stuff where kids can see stuff that adults can't. There's a lot of ghost stories where kids can see the ghost and the adult's never seen it, or the kid says something weird like, oh, you know, that's the guy who comes into my room at night, and the parent is always like, what? And I thought, well, let's expand that into like a fuller mythos, and think about what a world would be like if that were true, if we just accepted that there were things out there that will harm us and only the kids can see them. Kind of how would society have developed from that point? Again, it was a fun kind of thought experiment about, well, there would obviously be people protesting for the welfare of these kids, and there would obviously be people taking advantage and running some kind of black market. There would be crime around this. There will always be crime. And what would it all look like? And worst of all, what would happen to you if you were in that situation where, through no fault of your own really, or through some kind of bizarre accident, you lose the thing that's protecting you, and you've got to kind of scramble to deal with that against something that you can't even see.
Yeah, I really like the world building that you did on that one. And on the last story, my favorite one on the entire book was actually Epiphany. It's the final story. This one, you can almost get like a novel out of this one, just the idea. Another futuristic society where this group, this guild of artisans, I suppose. They take people who they think are greatly skilled in their own personal, like in this instance, it was a seamstress, and they take her and they basically physically and psychologically torture her over an extended period of time to bring forth her artistic best.
Yeah.
And this one, where did you come up with the idea for this one?
So there's a lot of discourse about whether suffering is required to make good art. People talk about it, about the best painters had tragic lives, the best authors, the best singers. Do you have to have some element of trauma to be able to create that kind of beauty? And so I just kind of wanted to extrapolate that and play with it and say, well, what if there was a kind of fanatical group who had carte blanche to push that idea to its limits, and really I really wanted to twist the knife with that one as well, with a protagonist who has suffered by the end so profoundly and just kind of wants to give up, but also kind of, I mean, I don't want to give away the ending, but it's a popular choice for favorite. I put a lot of, I think I put a lot of like hurt into that one. I think if you want to make a character hurt, you've got to kind of reach for that hurt somewhere and give it to them.
It is kind of true.
Yeah, to make it kind of true. I do. If it's just all knives and blood and guts, that's all well and good, and there's nothing wrong with it. But if you want to make it really land,
you've got to put a piece of yourself into it.
I think you do. So maybe suffering is needed for art. Maybe it's not, but that's what the story plays with.
Okay, let's hop in the DeLorean and go back in time. What kind of kid was Jim Horlock growing up?
Well, as I mentioned, I was scared of everything. And I grew up in the 90s. So a lot of kids' TV and movies had horror in them, just as standard. It was just there. If you looked at things like The Land Before Time was one of my favorite movies. And there's
scary stuff in there. Yeah. There's some scary stuff in that movie, man.
And that's what we used to do. We used to, what was it called? Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim or whatever it was. The Legend.
Yeah. I remember that one.
Yeah. A lot of those films. Too. Yeah, they had genuinely terrifying moments. Even stuff like Dumbo, Pinocchio, Bambi
had some trauma in that movie right there.
Even like Winnie the Pooh, the Heffalumps and Woozles song, the hallucination that he has. Winnie the Pooh goes on a trip and has this horrible nightmare, and it was terrifying.
I remember one that scared me as a kid. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where the girl turns into the big, the big blueberry, and then let's like roll her out. I don't know, man. I was like 6, 7, 8 years old when I saw that, and I was all like, "Oh man, what the hell is? What are they doing?"
Yeah. But not only that, but when they get on the barge and they go down that tunnel of horrors, where there's just horrors projected all over, there's like maggots and the music's all discordant, and he's singing, and like no one. Again, the parents are powerless to do anything about it. Yeah, no, definitely horror in that movie.
Yeah.
That, again, I used to watch that,
and then
also
another one,
The Dark Crystal as well was another one. I used to love The Dark Crystal.
Oh yeah, the Never-Ending Story. When the horse sinks into the Swamp of Sorrows, I think it was. That like traumatized me when I was like 7 or so. I was like, oh my God, that was so sad. Yeah. That was like one of the saddest scenes in any kid's movie you will ever find.
And these were just standard movies back then.
Oh yeah.
I don't know whether that's good or bad that that's not the case anymore, but it certainly pushed me into thinking a lot more about what was scary and what was sad. And I was a really emotional kid. I took it all in. And I think I just became kind of fascinated with what makes people scared and why. Why am I afraid of this though? I it didn't help. My mother was a psychiatric nurse, And the mental hospital, we lived in the grounds of the mental hospital because it was staff
Oh, wow.
housing, and it was a Victorian era asylum.
Oh, wow.
So that was a big, imposing, scary building
Oh,
surrounded by scary trees, and the odd escaped patient where they would have to lock down the site and stuff like that. So there was, I don't know, maybe that played into some of the
Yeah. That's a
some of the
fertile
fears.
breeding ground. That's a fertile breeding ground for a budding horror author right there.
Yeah, I think if
Sure.
you wanted to create one, you would put him there as a child. That would be your starting point.
That was so cool. I remember our showrunner RJ. He's probably heard me talk about this before. When I was a kid, there was in my hometown, like about 100 years ago, there was this woman who was a serial killer she was a poisoner. Okay, and
Wow.
the house is still there. And I was raised by my grandmother, and she would drive me by the house sometimes by that house, and she would tell me, like when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, she'd tell me, you know, who lived there, and she would tell me about this, and that really impressed upon me. You know,
Yeah,
I
I mean,
found it
that's
fascinating.
proper
Yeah.
urban legend stuff. That
Exactly. Like I thought it was scary, of course, but I thought it was fascinating also.
yeah, but then you get fascinated, right? And I think there's such a
hmm
fine line between fear and fascination. I think that's where
Yeah,
we play all the time.
exactly. Well, we talked a little bit about what films impacted you growing. What books specifically impacted you growing up, and uh, like when did you really decide that you wanted to be a writer?
That's a good question. When I was growing up, I read a lot of fantasy stuff, and I had books that kind of towed the line between fantasy and horror, or they were fantasy with dark elements. There was a series called The Whitby Witches, which I read, which had some really dark stuff in it. And there was Weird Stone of Brisingamen and all these kind of fantasy fantasy novellas, a lot of them, but always with darker elements. Even stuff when I was very young, even stuff like the Chronicles of Narnia,
Oh yeah,
which
I love those.
seem on their face pretty harmless kid stories, some Christian allegory going in there, which is maybe a bit dodgy, but you know, uh, but then like the god Tash shows up and is a horrible vulture creature, and the world ends and they all die. And so I think there's always been darker elements in the stuff that I read. Um, I didn't. I actually wanted to be a writer from when I was quite young. I remember there was a school assignment to write a short story, and I must have been about 7 or 8 years old at the time. And the weekend previous, I had stayed with my dad, who always let me watch stuff that I shouldn't watch. And we had watched the like old black and white version of War of the Worlds. It was like
Oh, right.
1950 something maybe.
53, I think. Yeah,
Mm.
the George
And
Pal.
so yeah.
Mhm.
I was obsessed, and my story completely plagiarized War of the Worlds. But
That was my
like,
favorite book growing up. That was my favorite
Really?
book, More Than the World. Yes, I love
Oh,
that
wow.
book.
Did you ever listen to the radio plays and everything?
Yes, I have heard of that one. Yes, yeah. Listen to
Really
that.
good, really good stuff. But yeah, so I completely ripped off H.G. Wells as my first creative project. But I just enjoyed writing so much, and I was like, wow, I could make up anything. I could write anything in here, and it kind of blew my mind. I was like, well,
hmm
then let's do that. Like, why not? Like, I love stories, so why not make my own? And it
Yes.
wasn't until much later on that I guess that was kind of a sci-fi horror-ish story. There were aliens in it, and they were killing people. But yeah, it didn't veer fully into horror until much later.
Yeah, there is that sort of sense of like godlike power when you're writing a story because you can, as you say, you can literally do anything.
Yeah,
And I know with my
yeah,
own material, I am primarily my first and foremost the audience for my own stuff. Like I write stuff that I want to read. So there
absolutely.
is that sort of sense of there's like a sort of self pleasure there, and also like a godlike feeling. Sounds
Yeah,
weird. Writers know, like other writers know what you're talking about. Like
for sure.
normal lay people, they think you're like, man, these guys are weird. But No, we know what we're talking about. Like we know what we mean.
And to be fair, we are weird. So they are also.
Yeah. Your biography in the book says you're a comic book nerd. Also, yeah,
big
me
time.
too. I actually drew comics for a little while. Actually, I had
That's
some
crazy.
published in Heavy Metal magazine, a few of them.
Oh wow.
So I am also a huge comic nerd for many, many years before I became like a prose writer. My
That's
goal
so
was
cool.
to write and draw comics.
So
I'm a
like
huge one.
mainstream stuff, or like indie, or like superheroes,
All of it,
or all of it.
everything. I love the way to tell a story using words and pictures. I just loved it. I was into everything. I love Marvel, DC, indie stuff, horror, heavy metal magazines, like fantasy stuff. You name it, I read it.
Yeah,
I had a huge collection, so I definitely get that.
that's
Do you have any
awesome.
favorite? Do you have any favorite comics at the moment, like your graphic novels that you're into?
At the moment, I have just reread the very end of Hellboy. I loved Hellboy, and I
Yeah.
have been a huge Hellboy fan for years. And I got that kind of real sad, kind of bittersweet feeling when the story was over.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just now gone back to reread the end again. So Hellboy's definitely a favorite for me. There's a horror series called The Nice House on the Lake.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
which
I've
is,
read that one.
and
That
it has
one
now a
was a mind
sequel.
blower. Yes, right.
Mm.
Yeah, nice house by the sea. I think is the sequel.
That's
I've read
right.
the first
Yeah. So
two
I'm
issues of
starting to
that.
read that. Yeah. I loved that.
That one.
The story was
That one is a mind blower right there. How they're all in the house, and you think that Walter is just like first you think he's just this schlubby schmucky guy, and then he's
yeah.
oh
Yeah,
man,
those panels are so good.
yes,
Whenever that
I
happens,
know.
it's just
The,
intense. I would just stare at them. Yeah,
I know the art in those phenomenal, absolutely
and the cover
phenomenal.
art as well. Cover art
Oh
is
yeah,
beautiful every time.
yes,
Yeah,
I
so
love
that's my
those.
favorite.
That's probably one of my current favorites. Love that. And I also understand you're a cryptid enthusiast.
I love a cryptid.
Yes.
You love a cryptid.
What in living in Wales? What are some local legends or ghosts or cryptids that the rest of the world may not be aware of? Like what's some like local flavor to like legends and lore that you have there?
Okay, yeah. We've got. I mean, yeah, all over the UK, we've got lots of cryptids. Wales specifically, or like folklore creatures. We're big on giants in Wales. Quite a few giants around. And interestingly, often the way to defeat a giant, you write this down because if you ever encounter one, shave him,
Okay.
shave off
Really?
his beard. Yep, you'll
Wow.
remove his powers. Yeah, very
Oh.
important, especially if they're a Welsh giant. I don't know if that works on giants internationally, so bit of a risk. And you might also have to kill a magic boar to get a comb and a shears from the boar to shave the giant. It's a process. Yeah, there's a local to me just up the road. There's a castle that has a moat around it, and we have a legend of a hag who lives in the moat, and she is supposed to rise out on I think a full moon, and scream the name of the next person to die.
Oh wow, that's pretty
Yeah,
interesting.
I've never seen her, but she's supposed to be in there.
Interesting. Okay, so the next segment of our interview is probably my favorite. I call it the lightning round of nerd questions. This is kind of like
Oh
free
wow!
association. This is kind of like free association. I say something, you answer with the first thing that pops in your head. Okay.
Let's do
Okay.
it.
All right. All-time favorite movie.
The Thing.
Ooh, good choice. I love Rob Bottin's effects in that movie. That is just in the head. It's just
To this day, they stand up. So good.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. So that may answer my next question, which is all-time favorite horror movie.
Well, yes, probably The Thing. I also really love. There's a movie by Benson and Moorhead called The Endless, which is like a cosmic horror, and it has a cult in it. But it's probably one of the best examples of cosmic horror that I've seen on screen.
Oh, cool.
Really good, really solid. It's about these two brothers. They grew up in a cult, but they escaped, and then they get a kind of doomsday tape from the cult when they're adults.
Mhm.
And the one brother's not happy with life. They live crappy lives. They've got crappy jobs. They've got no friends. And he's like, let's just go back and see what it's like. And so they do, and it goes downhill from there. But it's really solid, really good work.
I'm gonna have to watch that one. Okay,
Yeah,
so we were talking about werewolves there. We were talking about werewolves earlier. So, what's your favorite werewolf movie?
Probably Dog Soldiers. Neil Marshall.
I like that one.
Such a good one. So solid. The werewolves in it as well, weirdly gangly, which I think just made them more scary. They're like really tall for some reason, like long limbs, which just kind of made them more uncanny and freaky. But yeah, Dog Soldiers.
And the action elements in though are fantastic. For people who haven't seen that movie, if you like Predator or Aliens or something like that, go watch Dog Soldiers. It has the same level of action and intensity to it,
and the same kind of squad of characters as well. Like both of those movies you just mentioned have that kind of squad dynamic where you get the relationships and you get the banter and all that kind of stuff built up really quickly, very early on. And it just helps as the movie progresses.
Right. Okay. Favorite guilty pleasure movie? You know, the one that's not that good, but that you love anyway.
Ooh, what's terrible? Oh, Jason X.
Oh yeah, that one's a fun movie though. That one's actually really fun. I like that.
Fun. And in my humble opinion, the greatest Jason Voorhees kill of all time: the liquid nitrogen head freeze, head slam on the desk. Perfection.
I kind of like the other one I like where they send someone in space was Hellraiser Bloodline, when they've got Pinhead in space and it's got the three different storylines going at once. I kind of like that one too.
I still think, you like what you like.
Yeah. Favorite TV show all time?
All-time favorite TV show? Oh man, Deadwood maybe. I love Deadwood. I think it was really solid writing all the way through. I love the dialogue. That show is like a masterclass in dialogue.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Your 5 favorite musical performers.
Oh, geez. Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden, Lizzie Hale of Hailstorm, for sure. She's got such an incredible voice. God, 5 favorite musical performers. Maybe David Draymond from Disturbed. Again, just incredible range of vocals. Vessel from Sleep Token. If we're talking about range, that guy is just phenomenal. Is that 4? Did I do 4 or 5?
That's 4. Yeah, one more.
Need one more. Jeez. I can't think of a single musical performer now. I've run out. There's only 4 on the planet. I love Blackstone Cherry. I think as a band, they're just a lot of fun and they do great covers. They're good to sing in the shower.
All right. Favorite food?
Favorite food? Probably pizza. That's probably a boring answer, but you can put anything on a pizza. And even when you get a bad pizza, it's still pretty good.
True. Favorite junk food?
I love fried chicken. I'm a big sucker for like greasy, big bucket of greasy fried chicken.
What was the name of your first pet?
The name of my first pet was Bronwyn, which is quite a Welsh name. And they were a border collie.
Oh, cool. I like that.
Yeah, she's not.
First celebrity crush.
Like a real person or like a fictional person?
Either. Doesn't matter.
Cool. When I was a kid, the first crush I can remember having from someone from TV was Wednesday Addams.
That's cool. Yeah, I noticed when I was like a teenager, I had a huge crush on Sarah Michelle Gellar. Like,
Yeah.
but I don't want. I was never quite sure if it was her or if it was Buffy Summers that I liked. Like it was kind of there was like a blur there.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I get that.
I was a Willow guy. I liked Willow. Nerdy and
Nothing.
cute.
Oh yeah, nothing wrong with that. Yet powerful.
Yeah. Terrifying. Kind of terrifying.
Okay, Superman or Batman?
Superman. Superman. I love
Okay,
Batman,
cool.
but yeah, Supes.
I've got this theory about Superman and Batman. Like, I think sometimes they write Superman wrong because they focus on his Kryptonian side. But to me, he's always Clark Kent. Like that's what makes him like a hero. Is that he's not Superman? Like Clark Kent's not the secret identity. Clark Kent's who he is all the time. Like Superman's the secret identity. Like Batman's just the opposite. Like Bruce Wayne is kind of the mask. He's always Batman.
Yeah. I have had this exact argument with people before.
Mm-hmm.
Completely agree.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. A biopic is made of the life of Jim Horlock. What's the name of the movie and which actor plays you?
Oh man, what's the name of the movie? I always promised my friend that if I had an autobiography or a biopic or something, it would be called Waiting for John, because I spent so much of my life. He's always late. I spent so much of my life waiting for that guy, so I would immortalize him by naming it that.
That would be funny.
Who plays me?
He's like your own person. He's like your own personal Godot.
Just, yeah, he's just chronically. He was late one time to his own house where I went to meet him. You live here. Anyway. Who would play me? I think Tom Hardy would give it a good go.
I can see it. Yes, that would be a good choice. Okay, you're stranded on a deserted island. What 3 things do you take with you?
Okay, 3 things. I would take a hatchet, because that's good for all sorts of things, really versatile tool. I would take, I'd need to take a book of some kind, because otherwise I'll lose my mind. I would probably take Terry Pratchett's Thief of Time. I love that book, and I could just read it again and again and again. So I would take that. And the last thing, I would take maybe some kind of tarp or something that I can do all sorts with. Boring answers maybe, but I intend to survive this island that you've stranded me on.
Okay, favorite vacation spot?
I love the Lake District. If you've never been to the Lake District in the UK, it is just stunning. It doesn't even matter where in the lake. It's a huge swathe of land. Well, maybe not to American viewers, a very small swathe of land compared to what you've got. But just everywhere is beautiful there. Like every turn you take, every village you go to is all picture postcard and so peaceful. It's a lovely part of the world. I recommend it to anyone.
That's really cool. Okay, you meet your 13-year-old self. What advice do you give the younger you?
Stop taking yourself so seriously.
That's actually good advice, though.
Yeah, I mean, I was very, couldn't laugh at myself at all, not relaxed, horrible self-esteem issues. And yeah, if I could just let go of some of that and learn to laugh at myself a bit, I probably would have had an easier time with things.
You find that genie's lamp. What 3 things do you wish for?
Like 3 items or just 3 things? 3 things.
3 anything. 3 wishes.
3 anything. I would like a mansion in the country, in the Lake District, that I could use as a writer's retreat, and people could come and work on their stuff. I think that would be really cool. I would love a horror bookstore that I could run as a small business, and I could just stock it with indies and small pubs, and So every time you go in there, you're probably going to find a book you've never heard of. But
Mhm.
you're going to love it. And I would like selfishly, I would like the sword that Terry Pratchett forged and hid from the authorities before his death.
All right. So what's next for Jim Horlock?
Well, I have a novella in the works
Cool.
with Grendel Press. Very different from Changing of the Terrors. It is my kind of love letter to slasher horror, which was a kind of formative part of my early foray into horror movies.
Mhm.
I always kind of loved them. They're always a bit cheesy and a bit naff and a bit, they break their own rules. And the longer the franchise goes on, the worse it gets. But there's something kind of,
Oh yeah.
it's cheesy
But
fun.
that's the fun of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you buy in. You buy in. Wave your suspension of disbelief and buy in. So yeah, I have a slasher horror novella coming out. That will be. I don't have a release date yet, but I'm hoping it will be soon. Edits are now back with the publisher. I'm hoping. I had some cool news about cover art the other day, so it feels like the wheels are very much turning. And I'll keep you all posted on my socials when that sort of starts to become available.
Yeah, I'd like to review that when you get an ARC. That
I'll
sounds
put
like
you on
something
the
I
list.
would like. Oh, cool. Thank
Yeah.
you.
For sure.
Okay. Any shout outs you want to give?
Oh God, so many. My buddy Brad Abdul, he is a more urban fantasy kind of writer. He's got a fantastic book out with Flame Tree Press, The Devil's Successor, and a sequel now coming very, very soon. Sorry, The Devil's Advisor, and the sequel is The Death's Successor, and they are fantastic books. He is such a cool guy. He's just a real supporter in the community as well. So he definitely deserves a shout. My writing group, who helped me critique and listen to my woes and let me scream into the void when it's all going wrong. They are just fantastic people. And I think every writer kind of needs that kind of support. The people at Quill and Crow who made Changing of the Terrors possible, particularly my editor Damon, she is just fantastic. And the book wouldn't be what it is without her huge effort and hard work. I could just go on and on. There's so many people that I think writing is a community and should be a community, and there are so many people in that community to whom I owe thanks. And I'll do that by continuing to put back into the community.
Excellent. Where can people find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter for now. At Horlock. I am also on Instagram as Jim Horlock Writes. I'm on Blue Sky at Horlock Warlock. And where else? I'm kind of on TikTok, but I'm too old to really understand what I'm doing on TikTok. You can find I'm Jim Horlock on TikTok if you want to come watch me fail at TikTok.
Oh man, you've been a really, really great guest tonight, Jim. It was fun talking to you. And when your new novella comes out, I want to read it, review it, and have you back on the show. Don't forget, everyone, head on over to Amazon and check out Changing Other Terrors. And if you've enjoyed tonight's show, remember, like, share, subscribe to Critical Blast on YouTube, and that's it. And the damn show is done. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.